kind of expecting the entrance of Darth Vader music when I came on stage, just because, rather than a standing ovation. Last week I went to the Pulse conference, the GP conference, and manned the stand for CQC on the first day with some of my colleagues. One of the GPs that was there came up and said to me, "You're the enemy, aren't you?" Which, well, I don't think we are. We don't intend to be. And I'm hoping that today, by talking you through how our new methodology is going to work, taking some questions from you, and I have my colleague with me, Elaine Baxter, who's an inspector in my team as well. We'll be around over lunch and so on. So if you have any questions that you don't want to ask now or you think of later, feel free to come and speak to us. Okay. So, I'm sure you're probably all aware, it's been much vaunted, and hopefully you're on our Twitter and Facebook, and if you're not, what you're doing with your evenings, that we have a new approach to inspecting GP practices. So as of the 1st of April, things changed. Prior to that, for about 3 years prior to that, maybe 4, we were all in inspection teams inspecting across a range of services. And as of the 1st of April, we've now decided, the Commission has decided that we should specialise. And not only should the inspectors specialise, we should bring in the specialist advice and the knowledge from the healthcare community, particularly for the GPs and the NHS, to support our inspections and to inform them properly about what's going on in practices and help us make robust judgments. Just you'll see on this title page, within the Chief Inspector Steve Field of General Practices remit, we've also got dentists, integrated healthcare, medicines management, safeguarding children, and health and justice. So places like Yarl's Wood, for example, the healthcare there comes under this particular directorate, but is managed by a specialist team in conjunction with the relevant other regulators. So this is what we're doing differently. Our teams, when they come into you, can I just have a quick show of hands? How many of you had an inspection under the old methodology prior to April? Oh, quite a few of you. Yeah, okay. You'll know when you are inspected under the new methodology, it will be very different, because I imagine for most of you, did you have just maybe one person come to the practice, or maybe one person plus one other to help them? Going forward, that will be different. At the moment, I can tell you that none of you are being inspected in this current quarter, so I'm sure you would know by now if you're in that wave. Inspection teams have specialist inspectors, so that means they've specialised, not that they're clinically qualified, but they've specialised within a particular inspectorate. GPs, practice nurses or practice managers, and a trainee GP. And before I go any further, we were at a conference yesterday and Steve Field led our conference. It was our Primary Medical Services conference. And I said to him, "I'm doing this talk today." And he went, "Oh, good luck." And I said, "Any tips?" And he said, "Yes, ask them to join us." And what he means by that is don't all leave your jobs and come and work for CQC. What he meant by that was if you can get involved and come and join and support one of our inspections, firstly, that's a really good way for you to see what the new methodology looks like and what your experience might be like. But secondly, it gives you an understanding, if you like, of the whole experience. So I think for you going forward, it might dispel some of the mythology. And I have another little anecdote, which I'll tell you a little bit later, about a visit I made to a GP surgery last week. So in the last year, when we inspected you, you were selected on either a random or level or basis or a risk basis, depending on information we may have received. And I can't tell you individually what that might have been. I wasn't managing this patch then anyway. What we'll now do is going forward inspect practices over a CCG area. So, and we will select a percentage. At the moment it's 25%, because the plan is that in a CCG area we'll have inspected every single practice over a 2-year period. So as it says here, probably every 6 months we'll inspect in that CCG area, inspecting a quarter of practices in that time. Prior to that, we have an information sharing meeting where we meet with the local area teams from the NHS and the CCG, who will give us information, some of their sort of information that we may hold about the practices that we've selected, which will help inform our inspections. And then after the inspections, we will hold quality summits with those groups as well, to give them the theme of what we found. We can drill down into individual locations, but we'll also be saying if there are any themes that we've picked up across that particular patch related to the local health economy. We are introducing ratings, but that's not actually going to happen until October. And I know you know them because Peter mentioned outstanding before, outstanding, good, requiring improvement or inadequate. They're very similar to the Ofsted ratings. And they are also not just about an overall rating, they're about rating individual aspects of what we look at during the inspection as well. Our intelligent monitoring is strengthening. Prior to now, we didn't really have an awful lot of information on you. We had loads on NHS hospitals, so if you inspected an NHS hospital, you had this lovely big pack of information that would help to plan your inspection. We haven't had that on other services, but we are strengthening that, and the data packs, as they're called, are now coming out and giving us really robust, useful information. So, for example, next week and the week after, Elaine and a number of other inspectors are going to be inspecting the South Warwickshire area CCG, which is one that I'm leading. We had a planning meeting on Monday. We were able to look at the data pack together on Monday. We also sent it to our pharmacist colleagues for them to identify if there are any issues in case we needed to take a pharmacist to particular locations, particularly where they were dispensing practices and so on, to add to more specialist knowledge that we might need. And when the data packs are final, they are then shared with the CCG as well. So you will have, and you would have access to that as well. So you will see what we know about you, what we're being told about you as well. And sometimes, certainly when we inspected Northampton General Hospital in January, I was part of that, we realised that we'd got something wrong, so we were able to put that right, and we had some input from the other stakeholders. Later on, when our most recent intelligent monitoring came out, Milton Keynes Hospital contacted us and said, actually, someone's given you some wrong data, and we were able to put that right. So it's not, we know this about you and that's cast in stone. If there are errors or issues, or you think something's been wrongly reported to us, then we can look at that as well. It won't be me personally, I don't do data, I'm not I can read it, but I'm not the one that puts it all together. We have a whole intelligence team for that. New ways of gathering patient views as well. Before, we used to just rely on talking to whoever was there in the surgery on the time, and maybe if we could get some details, phone some patients outside. Obviously, we will do that too, but you've now, most of you, got the patient participation groups, and so we'll be contacting the chair or vice chair of those groups before we come and inspect your surgeries, so that we can actually gather their views and they can talk to us about the sorts of things that they've been doing and how they've been inputting into you to help you improve the patient experience. And then finally, and this is still under development, developing a clear approach to responding to failing practices, working with NHS England. Steve talked very briefly about that yesterday at our conference, and it is literally, the failure regime is under development, but it will be working in partnership. It's not just about CQC judgments, and it's not something that's going to be gone into very lightly either. It will be over a period of time, and continuing well, we don't say non-compliance. I'm going to have to get out of that language because we won't be talking about compliance or non-compliance. It'll be continuing failure. And as it says here, we're no longer focused solely on whether private providers are compliant or non-compliant. And one of the good things about that is that just doesn't really tell you anything about the quality of the service. It doesn't tell you how good a practice can be, and it doesn't help you in terms of sharing good practice or wanting to find out how to improve. You don't know where to look because you haven't got flagged up for you, this is a good practice, this is an outstanding practice for these reasons, or this element of this practice is really good. So by reporting under our 5 key questions, which is where we will then be giving those under ratings, those sub ratings, about safety, effectiveness, caring, responsive and well led, you'll be able to identify within that, having looked at our website, you'll be able to identify which practices are good at which things, and maybe be able to either join up with them, contact them, or just look at the things in the report that we cite as good practice and help to inform your own practice by doing so. We're also going to look at the 6 patient groups in every practice. So, older people, I mean basically this does cover everybody, but we're breaking it down into these groups so no one should be left out. So older people, so that's the over 75s, people with long-term conditions, mothers, babies, children and young people, working age population and those recently retired, People in vulnerable circumstances who may have poor access to primary care, so homeless people, maybe people with learning disabilities who can't make themselves understood, and people experiencing a mental health problem. Sometimes you might have a practice where you're perhaps on a university campus, or the Lincolnshire inspections that are going on at the moment, they went to one that was on an RAF base, and they're not able to report under every single one of those patient groups because they don't see every single one of those patient groups. So if you don't have that patient group, we won't try and report under it. We won't say that you're failing because you don't have that patient group. We'll simply say it's not applicable. Okay, so this is our ratings grid, and I appreciate it's quite small. It's even smaller in your packs because I've just seen it and I can't see it even with my glasses on the end of my nose. So you can see how we would come to aggregated scores. I'm not going to dwell on this too much because, as I said, we're not rating at the moment, and it might be that maybe I come back to you next year in your conference and we're able to talk about it on a more informed basis when we've started to actually do it. What we will do now, when we're going out to practices at the moment, is think to ourselves, might this be good, might this be outstanding, and start to come to an understanding of what those things mean, because without actually going out and seeing the practice, it's difficult to judge really, and obviously look at across practices across the region, across the country, share the information with our colleagues and say what we think about that. It's difficult for us to come to those judgments. So by the time we actually are rating, we should be better informed about what constitutes good and so on. So you can see that we'd look under the population groups, we'd look across the 5 questions, and they'd come out with our aggregated scores at level 2, and then at level 3, we would again aggregate the questions for each, the scoring for each question, and then finally come out with an overall rating. So it's a little bit mathematical, but it is also about the judgment as well. And just because an inspector comes to, with their group, comes to an inspection, they'll come to a decision about where they think these ratings lie. That's not the end of it. We've got lots of different quality assurance levels. At the moment, with the out of hours that's just happened, the out of hours pilot that's just happened, we've had senior experienced GPs on our national panels, because they've been looking at every single report because it's quite a small sample. We will go to regional panels. At the moment, I'm not entirely sure about how they'll be made up. People like myself will be on it as an inspection manager because I'll have the view of my own team, and obviously we've got to measure that against the views of the other inspectors of the other teams, the other geographical areas as well. But we will have specialist support with that as well, and then there will be a national panel as well, because consistency, I know from having spoken to people like yourselves and spoken to GPs, is one of your biggest concerns, and that's also one of our biggest concerns, because we're only as good as our, how robust our systems are, and if we're not consistent, then we're not really very credible. So that's where we are with that. Can I just remind you as well, this is all, our methodology is being piloted. We're learning as we're going along, as we're trying it. So we are feeding back as we're going out to say, well, this didn't work, or maybe if we did it this way. And yesterday we were getting the opportunity to hear people that had already been out able to tell us things like that. There were already some things that we were picking up about maybe making sure the way that reports were written, because they've changed quite significantly from how we used to write reports, to make sure that that message was going out consistently. So we're constantly evolving, constantly learning, and you are able to feed back as well on what you're finding from us as well. And I must remind myself to come back to the consultation. So you've got your timelines here. Obviously, we're already sort of in the middle of that band. The signposting document went out on our website in December, so you were able to have a look at that. That was just the high-level stuff. This is what we're proposing to do. Between January and March, the out-of-hours pilot, I just mentioned, where we went into approximately 30 providers, not necessarily 30 locations, because some of the things we found with that were, for example, I think there was one in Devon where there was one registered location but there were 15 satellite services, and that's the registration of all of that is something we'll be looking at as we come out as well, to make sure firstly that you're correctly registered, because you may have gone one way or the other. You may have thought, I must register everything and have every location registered, and you may not need to. So we'll be looking at that with you when we come out, just to check. If it's the other way round, we'll be advising you that you do need to register other locations, but we won't be punishing you for not doing it, for not understanding, okay? So currently, yes, this is what I wanted to come back to next. I don't know, have any of you seen the draft inspection handbook on our website? It's out for public consultation now. Can I please urge you to look at it and encourage your colleagues to look at it as well, because you have the opportunity, as do we as CQC staff, to feed back on it, to say, I don't think this will work, or yes, that's great, but have you thought about doing it this way, and so on. Obviously, that's what consultation means. I think it's the 4th of June. I wrote it down yesterday and I haven't brought the date with me, but I think the 4th of June is the deadline, but it will tell you that on the website as well. And if you're Twitter, Facebooky person, you'll find the information on how to get to it there as well. It's not a massive document, but it's chunky. But it is the handbook that's going to come out to you, that's going to tell you the sorts of things that we're going to be asking. So it's really important for you that you get, A, to see it and get an understanding, because it's not meant to be a big mystery. We're trying to be as open and transparent as possible, but also B, that you can say, well, some of this isn't going to be appropriate, or yes, we think this is good, and so on. So please do look at that. So wave 1 of the testing of the inspections, which is what we're in at the moment, has started. Cumbria and West Lincolnshire are ongoing. As I said, we're starting next week. Steve Field has also instructed us 2 things, and I know these will be 2 things that will be close to your heart. 1, if we can't get a GP for an inspection, or if our GP that we've got has dropped out and we can't replace them, that inspection won't go ahead. It will be rescheduled, because we've committed to take a GP under our new methodology, so it will not go ahead, okay? And I've got one that's due to go out next Tuesday, and we haven't got a GP yet, so I'm thinking we probably won't go to that one. If, you know, we might find a GP at the 11th hour, but at the moment we haven't got one, so that one won't go ahead. And it will happen, it will be rescheduled, it will happen so once we are properly staffed. But we may not have practice managers, practice nurses with us at the moment, because we're still building up our cohort of people, specialist advisors, but we absolutely will have a GP with us, okay? So yes, so that ends in June, and then we've just identified the next lot of practices, the 300 for wave 2 of inspections, but that's not publicly available, so I can't tell you that yet. And that will go, that's in the next quarter, July to September, and it will be ongoing testing, you know, because what will happen is we should learn from the feedback that we'll all be giving, and we will be getting possibly from yourselves as well, about what, not you particularly, but people like yourselves who've been inspected in quarter 1, about what the experience was like. We have had some feedback. Yesterday we had some people talking where they started to gather some feedback, particularly some inspectors that had already been out on inspections, and they said, so far, good. People felt it was better, felt it was more positive. But again, as I said, we're still learning from that. So if during the course of your inspection you feel that you want to comment, then please do. Give the inspectors some feedback. At the end of the day, if you're the registered person, you'll be getting the feedback anyway. So feel free to say, well, can I make a comment, and give them some feedback too, because I don't think that's a bad thing at all. We need to learn from you as well. And there was another thing I said that was close to your heart, which I will mention, because I think I've got it on one of the slides, but I just want to be absolutely clear. Latest information from Steve yesterday was, unless there's an extremely good reason, so it would be a high risk-based situation, we will not be going into records, patient records, and looking at records. So your inspectors, inspection team should not come through the door and say, show me 10 records, show me 20 records. They shouldn't do that anyway. They should not be doing that anyway, but I know that there has been concern about that, and I know it may have happened under the old methodology. None of the inspection team will do that unless you are having a risk-based inspection that's outside of the CCG plans, because we've had a lot of information. So we've got a situation going on in another part of the country at the moment where we're going to have to do a series of risk-based inspections. But even so, we will not come in and say, we need to look at those records now. We will get the patient contact details from you, and we will contact the patients and ask them for their permission to look at their records, explaining why. Okay, so I hope that clears that one up for you, because I think there's been quite a lot of concern about that and uncertainty, but Steve's very, very clear on that. Okay, so obviously I don't know if that will change at the moment, but certainly that's the clear and strong and loud message. Yesterday Elaine heard it as well, and I think one of the inspectors said, but, and he said, no, you're not doing it. So there you go, you heard it first. So October 2014, which doesn't seem very long away now, our new approach should be fully implemented, because we should have learned and we should have picked things up and we should have refined the processes. I mean, at the moment we're still appointing people into posts, so we should have people like inspection planners, but at the moment people like Elaine are going to have to book hotels for their team of their GPs, and when they find out who they are, and make sure they've got a lunch and things like that. They won't have to do that going forward, they'll be able to just focus on the inspection. But at the moment we're still populating all of those posts. And the ratings, as I said, will start then. By April 2016, every NHS GP practice and out-of-hours service will have been inspected and awarded a rating. Okay. So when I met with Peter and his team a couple of weeks ago, they asked me to say something about this, because again, I think this is something that has bothered people, about the recruitment and training of our inspection teams. We have inspectors, and I was one of them, who don't have a clinical background, because we weren't expected to have a clinical background when we were recruited. We are, as of last year, we've changed our recruitment processes so that we will only accept people with clinical backgrounds for either the PMS or the NHS stream, and an adult social care background for the adult social care stream. And if you go on our website and have a look at our adverts for inspectors and inspection managers, you'll see that that's very clear. If you can't say that you demonstrate that, you can't get past the first hurdle. The existing inspectors obviously will continue to receive the same training as everybody else, but we can't qualify them as doctors overnight. But that's where the specialist advisors come in, because the inspectors are the regulators, and the specialist advisors and the practice nurses and the practice managers who know how the practices work, they're the experts in those fields, and they will bring together information and evidence from inspections for the inspectors to make a judgment. But we would inspect the inspection team also, the specialist advisors and so on, to say whether or not they think something is good and whether they think it's outstanding, because you're the experts yourselves by working in that field yourselves. But ultimately the judgment will be a CQC judgment. Experts by experience, specialist advisors will also undergo training as they come in terms of, what to expect on the day and so on. But obviously we're bringing them in for their clinical knowledge, so it's just a bit of this is how the inspection works, this is how the inspector will be conducting the day and so on. But for them, it's more about telling us what their views are and what they know. Experts by experience, they are usually trained by the organisation that we recruit them from, but there is some CQC training as well to make sure that they do things the way we want them to do. We've had some interesting challenges in the hospital inspections, not just from them but from specialist advisors as well, about actually, at the end of the day, the inspector has to write the report, so they need the evidence, they need it captured in a certain way, they need to be able to follow the key lines of inquiry, and they need to make sure that everything's been looked at that was planned to be looked at. And if people decide that they want to go and look at a particular thing and go off-piste a little bit, that's not very helpful. So during the day there'll be corroboration sessions and so on, run by the inspector to make sure that the evidence is being gathered. Okay. You'll receive at least 2 weeks' notice of the inspection date, which is a huge change because you've got 48 hours under the old system. That's really helpful, obviously for you, but also for us, because it means that once the lead inspector has been identified and been in touch with you, you can come back to them and say, oh, do I need to do this, or can I, obviously we can't tell you exactly what we want to check when we go, because it depends on how you do things, and everyone's different. There's no checklist. There are key lines of inquiry, which you'll see in that handbook if you do the consultation exercise. And the inspection will take a full day. And I have said here it may be necessary for the inspector to come back the next day, but this would be highly unusual. Steve, again, yesterday said, I want them done in a day. But it might be a long day. So if you know we're coming in and you're the registered person, or if you can't stay later, then can you arrange for someone else to? Because it might be, at the moment, that some of them are finishing about 8 or 9 o'clock at night. So, I know, I thought that would do a rumble through the room. They don't have to, and I think, actually, some of them are taking longer at the moment simply because it's new methodology. And as we do more and more of them, they will be slicker and they'll be quicker. So hopefully, by the time we get to Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire, we'll be doing them in about 4 hours, but then you wouldn't like that either, would you really? So, you know, it should be a full day, a full business day at least. Okay. And as I said, we'll inspect all registered locations and may also inspect branch surgeries that are not registered as separate locations, depending on the information we hold. So if at the information sharing meeting the CCG say, oh, you really need to go to that branch surgery, then we'll go. Okay? Or if we think we get some information that makes us think maybe that one ought to be registered because it does seem to have a separate patient list or something, then we'll go. Okay. The team will be as I previously described. If you can provide a base for them to sort of dump the stuff and meet, that would be great. But we do appreciate that might not be possible, and that will be the conversations. One of the conversations you'll be having with the lead inspector in the 2 weeks leading up to the inspection. You may get more than 2 weeks' notice, by the way, once things are up and running a bit more. And we'll speak with key staff, and you will be informed ahead of time who we're going to need to speak to. So if somebody is not available on that particular day, because that's not their working day or so on, you know, we'll probably ask you if we can have their contact details so we can speak to them another time or arrange to come in and talk to them. You know, it's not, don't make people come into work if they don't work on a particular day. Don't stop people collecting their children from school if they need to collect their children from school. Please don't do that. Please don't think that because the inspector's there and that's happening, we're going to say, oh no, this isn't a very one practice. Actually, I would have thought it suggests you care about your staff. But, you know, obviously, if you can be flexible, that would be great. But, you know, please make us aware. If we've said, oh, well, we need to speak to this person, they say, well, they don't work on a Thursday. If you can make us aware of that before we come in, then we can make those other arrangements. Oh, I think I've done the same thing twice. We will also speak with patients, as I said before. We shouldn't delay any member of staff from seeing to a patient, nor will we interfere with patient appointment time. So if we are speaking with patients, I would recommend to my inspectors, if they can possibly, speak with patients after they've had their appointment. That may not always be possible, and sometimes people want to just go as well. But if we are speaking with patients and their appointment is due and we haven't noticed, please bring it to our attention. Please don't feel that you should not interrupt, because obviously the main reason that patient's there is to see their doctor, not to talk to us. And if you've got a receptionist who's talking to us and they're being kept away from the desk for too long, tell us, and they can go back because, again, they've got a job to do. We will want to speak in confidence with staff at times, but please can you tell the inspector if your staff member would prefer a third person present. So I've recently had to investigate a complaint in another part of the country, and one of the issues there was one of the receptionists who actually didn't end up speaking to the inspector, but she said because it was a man, she didn't want to sit in a room with this man on her own speaking to him. Perfectly reasonable, so please bring that sort of thing to our attention. We will ask to see some policies, but we're not going to ring you up beforehand and say, send us 26 policies, please, because we probably don't need them anyway. And actually, it's about how the experience for patients. So just because you've got a super duper policy, we want to see how you live and breathe that policy, really, rather than, oh yes, we've got this lovely policy and it's in a nice cupboard and people look at it once a year or whatever. We want to see what's actually happening for patients as a result of that policy. And as I said, we may look at patient records, but only if necessary to follow up a line of inquiry, and that is very, very unusual. I would have put very unusual, but Steve only said it yesterday, and I'd already sent my presentation over. We won't sign a confidentiality agreement. I know this is another thing that's come up. We are bound by our own code of practice on confidentiality, and staff are being told that they must revisit that. When I met with Peter a couple of weeks ago, he made a suggestion that when we send our letter out to the practice, that we mention this on the letter, and I have fed that back, and that's going back to our policy people. So please don't ask us to sign that, because we won't. But to be honest, if we're not looking at patient records, we shouldn't need to do that anyway. And the other thing is, obviously, if there's certain things that we want to know in terms of patterns, you should be able to get us that information anyway without us looking at 10 records or whatever. So, you know, I think really this is more about you wanting to protect your patients, but we have a duty to that as well, because we are bound by that. We have our own agreement and we have our own code of practice. And as I said, if you're unsure about anything, if you don't know what a question means or you don't know what it is that they want, please ask the lead inspector, or there may well be a second inspector. Ask them to clarify. Just say, what exactly do you want from me? What do you need? If you don't think they're being clear enough for you, please ask them to clarify. It's not a test. So if you're not sure, please ask, because obviously it's better for us if you understand and we get the best information from you. So, reporting. We will report against the 5 key questions. From October, we'll rate practices. Those of you that have been inspected already know about the factual accuracy process. So when we draft our report and it's gone through the manager and the QA panel to go out, it'll come to you for you to check the factual accuracy. And you can send a response back and that will be considered, and the report may or may not be changed as a result of your challenge. If we take enforcement action, you will also be able to challenge the factual accuracy of the warning notice or notice of proposal, and or make representations against its publication as well. So just to make you aware of your rights about that. Until October-ish, we're working under the current regulations. We're waiting for the new regulations to become final. We expect it to be around that time. So whilst we're reporting and inspecting in the new way, if we find that you're breaching regulations, we'll be actually taking action against the old regulation, the current regulations, I should say. And that's it from me, other than to just re-emphasise, can you please, please, please look at the consultation document, and please do come and join us on inspections. You know, it'd be really, really good for you and good for us as well. So, you know, feel free, just contact through our website. Okay, thank you.
Tracy, you mentioned about data gathering and the fact that we need to validate and possibly challenge some of that. Will we get an opportunity to have the data pack prior to the visit so that we can actually have time to go through, and then we could identify things that may be inaccurate?
Yeah, I think you will do. At the moment, again, that's all developing. And so, for example, the one for my South Warwickshire inspection has only just gone final because, you know, we are sort of developing and getting people into place and so on. But my understanding is that you'll be able to see that, yes, in the same way that the hospitals are able to see theirs.
Good morning, it's Deborah Porter, I'm practice manager in Luton. I've got one question and one observation.
Okay.
So we'll start with the question. You say don't ask you to sign confidentiality, but on the front of patient's consent, how do I justify to a patient somebody just walking in and looking at their records?
We won't do that. We'll ask the patient for that.
You'll
that was
ask the
Steve's
patient.
message yesterday. If we want to look at patients' records, we'll ask the patient for their consent.
Okay. And my observation was we pay for this service, and I don't quite personally understand why we do that, why the government have foisted that upon us. And an observation is that you've quickly changed the way that you undertake these visits. So, does that mean that the people who have been inspected, I'm not one, who have been inspected, will get a refund because obviously the service wasn't up to spec?
I think you might have to address that one to Jeremy Hunt, because I'm afraid I can't answer that question. I doubt it very much, put it that way.
Just one question back there, and then I'll come to...
Hi, Mimi Salgado, practice manager in Potters Bar, Hertfordshire. Just a quick question. You said that the inspectors will contact the practice prior to the visit and have a discussion. Would that be with the registered manager, or could the registered contact, i.e. the practice manager, deal with those discussions?
It's up to you to nominate. I mean, we would normally contact the registered person, but if the practice manager is nominated to carry out those sorts of duties, then that would be fine. Really, we want to talk to the person that knows what's going on in the practice and can help us best, yeah.
Hi, Anthea Doran, Davenport House in Harpenden. You mentioned that you're going to focus on various groups.
Mm-hmm.
If you're not going into patient records, how are you going to identify that? I don't quite understand how that process works.
Good question. Yeah, I think I might have to come back to you on that one because that's not something that had occurred to me yesterday. But I suspect it will be by asking you to provide us with information around those groups. So, I said earlier, if we wanted to know certain things, about perhaps a particular illness and its prevalence in your area or something like that and how many people have been treated for it, we would expect that you would probably have that sort of data yourselves and be able to provide it to us. So I suspect it will be linked to that, but I may have to come back to you and feed that back.
I was going to say, because obviously that will give you a general trend, but the
Yeah.
implication was that you actually want to speak to people in those groups about their experience.
Yeah,
of
we do,
care.
and so we might ask you to give us details of contact details of patients, but ahead of time, so I should have said this, ahead of the inspection you'll receive a poster and comment cards and so on for patients to respond to us either directly or through the comment cards, and the inspection team will collect those comment cards when they leave. We've decided at the moment not to have specific separate listening events prior to the inspections because they haven't been particularly well attended. What we're trying to do is sort of piggyback it onto trust inspections, NHS trust inspections, and sort of advertise it as a general listening event for healthcare in the area and see how that works as well. But no, that's a good question, and I will come back to Peter on that and get some clarification around that. Probably it's I'll get one of those, we're developing that approach, but I'll do what I can. Okay. Yeah, of course.
Sorry, so next question then. Waves 1 and 2 are not going to be rated.
No.
So are they then going to get re-inspected once rating starts before the
Eventually
2015?
Eventually we are going to have to rate everybody, so yeah, they
So
will be.
you potentially could get 2 hits in
Yeah.
2 years.
Yeah.
Take my question. It seems a bit unfair, that one, doesn't it?
It does, but I think because we've given the commitment to rate everyone by April 2016, it's the only way around it. I mean, I suppose you could look upon it as an advantage in that you've had forewarning and a sense of, this isn't very good or this is good, so let's...
Can I ask you a question? And it's about where practice development fits into this. How much of your report will be developmental suggestion and how much of it will be you ain't doing this right?
Well, we're very much keen on helping things develop and improve. We're not just there to say, this isn't good enough, you need to put it right. That's an element of what we have to do because we are an arm's length regulator, obviously. But no, we are very much keen to say, we think this is good, or can you, I think I said to you the other week, what we will be encouraging people to do is look at when we've published reports, and not just necessarily in your own area, we have started to publish the out-of-hours reports already. So as I would recommend that you start looking at those anyway, once the reports start to come out on our website. But in terms of the developmental aspect of it, it's a fine line for us to tread as a regulator, but direction, whereas previously we've stayed well back from the line before. So again, that's an evolving, emerging way, because it'll be an interesting way for the inspectors to work as well, because they've been told for the last 4 years, stay well away from that. So yes, yeah.
Which does seem a great shame because,
Yeah.
you have this wealth of experience.
Yeah.
Duncan Ferguson, Practice Manager, Burville House. We had an inspection a couple of months ago now, and I've spoken with other colleagues locally who've had inspections. And one of the things that comes crystal clear to me, there is quite a variance in the approach taken by inspectors, and how are you going to ensure if we have to reach certain standards are going to be rated as outstanding, good, etc., that your inspectors adopt a uniform approach and things are done consistently so that one practice doesn't feel that it has been unfairly treated by an inspector who's taken a different approach from other people.
Excellent question. I think that's really good. I'll try and sort of use that other anecdote that I was going to tell you about anyway to help to highlight that. The complaint I said that I was investigating another area of the country. When I went, one of the things that they raised with me was we've got reports that we're looking at elsewhere where people have had, the provider may wish to know, and we've been found non-compliant for the same thing. One of the problems around that was because they were spread across all these different teams where the managers were managing adult social care inspections and NHS inspections and GP inspections. Now we're specialised. My team, all their reports will come through me, and I will be doing quality assurance on that level, but I'll also be doing quality assurance with my colleagues at region level with the rest of the central region management team. So we'll be sharing reports and discussing where we think, the bar lies in certain things, but also in terms of, is this non-compliance, is this provider may wish to note. And then obviously there'll be the national QA process as well. In terms of the inspectors themselves, it's my job, in terms of my inspectors, for me to think, well, actually, I think this person's slightly over the top with this. I will bring it back down and say, you need to change this in your report. You need to be more consistent, because the other reports I've looked at, this is not, I keep using non-compliance, sorry, I do need to change that language. But this is not evidence of not good, if you like. So it's very much incumbent on people like myself and my colleagues regionally, but also through the national panel as well. And that is, when I went to that practice, they were very much about that, because as I said earlier on, if we're not consistent, then we're not very credible. So it's very much incumbent upon us to make sure that happens.
Sorry, a little bit of follow-up to that.
Yeah.
I've got previous experience in inspection and audit and banking.
Right.
In that area, what they would do is there would be a lead inspector who would actually go out and visit the inspection sites when his team, her team were undertaking that inspection, to ensure that there was fairness going on.
Yeah, no, there will be that. I'm going out next week to, I don't know yet where, where there will be a GP hopefully, in Warwickshire as part of that, and we will do that within the, you know, and over part of my role as a manager is to go out on inspections anyway over the year with my team to see that happen, and this will provide us with a better opportunity because it'll all be done over a sort of period of time, so I can go out every day over 2 weeks or something and see all the different inspectors at work. So yeah.
I was lucky enough to get my phone call on New Year's Eve and had my inspection the day after New Year's Day,
no.
so that was lovely.
I wasn't managing the team then.
Great way to start my 2014.
I wouldn't have let them do that.
I would like to say that I found it quite a positive experience.
Good.
I know that I'm probably the enemy as well now, but my inspectors both were, one was a hospital nurse, one was a practice nurse, very pragmatic about the whole thing, and actually gave me quite a lot of tips outside of things that were CQC regulations. I just wondered, there were a couple of things found that we did need to sort out in my practice, low risk things, but they're in my report. I presume that you are we'll get a follow-up on those, and I'll get them taken out of our report.
Yeah. Are they non-compliant?
Yes.
Yeah, if they're non-compliant, we'll follow it up. If it's a provider may wish to note, then we won't follow it up because that's not non-compliance. But yeah, you'll be on the list to be, my inspectors are, because we cover obviously this patch, they are going out and doing the follow-ups at the moment. They've had to pause for the moment because most of them are involved in this wave inspection, but they will come back and follow it up. Yeah.
Okay, because obviously I'd like that to happen quite quickly.
Oh yes, absolutely.
And secondly, I'd just like to say I had a partnership change, and it was the worst experience in the world trying to do the bureaucracy on the website.
Yeah.
And the partner who left is in Ethiopia and has still taken him 5 months to try and get his name off being a registered manager, and it's still not happened.
No.
And he actually hasn't been a partner in my practice since the 31st of July. I just wonder what's going to happen to the website and the bureaucracy.
Again, we are very much aware of that. It's another one of Steve's bugbears, and because we all feed it back to him. Because you know, I can't disagree with you. I think when that process is horrendous, you know, and it's the same with. That's one of the reasons I think probably why we're not issuing fixed penalty notices for you not having registered managers registered and so on, because actually we don't make it very easy for you. So yes, it's very much, but again, I will feed that back as comments because I've promised I'll go back.
I just suspect you've got a whole load of incorrect data on there now.
Yes,
because
absolutely.
we've got all put our applications in, and none of us can actually change it.
No,
because you can't work out what form it is, and you never get a response.
No, and I think that's part of the problem with it being centralised. I think what I would recommend is if you have particular problems around that, ask to speak to the inspector for the practice when you ring up Newcastle, and you'll get through to one of my team, and they can probably just go through it with you. Okay.
Yes, Sarah.
Hi there, my name's Sarah Ellingworth from the Garden City practice. We were, unlike the last practice manager that spoke, we were inspected on the 23rd of December again, very difficult timing for our practice. I don't think we did have a very positive experience, and part of that was down to the fact that we had 2 hospital nurses come to our practice and carry out certain things in their inspection I don't think were necessarily wholly appropriate. We've also had a follow-up inspection 10 days ago by an ex-policeman, and there are numerous areas that came up under the, well, I'd probably class it as a re-inspection because he covered material that wasn't raised on our first inspection, that clearly showed he didn't have the clinical experience or background. Now, I know you're changing it, and I really welcome the new change in the regime that you're planning, but I noticed you're planning on including practice managers on the inspection regime. I'm just wondering, in reality, how are you going to get hold of a practice manager who's got the time
Well, we are
to give to
getting them.
inspections, given the pressure on our workload. It was the opening part of the conference, and it's a real critical issue in primary care. All these things come back to practice managers. The practice managers have to sort all these things out. I just wonder, whilst it would be great to have practice managers in inspections, in reality, is that ever going to happen?
Well, I've got one actually for one of my inspections next week, so we will get some. But I take your point. You're not going to come out in droves to support our inspections. It doesn't have to be a practice manager. That's an ideal. It can be a practice nurse. So, yeah. If you've got concerns about that inspection, that follow-up inspection, I'm happy to talk to you about it because I manage that inspector.
Great.
Okay.
We've got time for one last one.
Could I just, qualify in terms of the application process? Because I've just tried to take one GP off and put 2 on. Managed to get the 1 off, but still trying to do the 2 on. And in terms of the documentation, it talks about having a DBS that's less than 6 months old. And because we'd actually got one, that I'd done obviously in terms of that recruitment, that's then not accepted. You have to go through the CQC one. Is that not something, because obviously as a practice we've ended up having to pay that out twice now?
Yeah, registration is something we are aware it needs looking at. Unfortunately, we can't change everything at the same time, but we are aware of your frustrations, and again, it's something I will feedback to Steve, definitely.